lot of this down now. Okay, great. Okay. So we left off on question 1. We talked about your role, what you do, transfer high schools, making the kids feel safe. Talked about who comes here, how they get here, which is a great one too, because I think that there's a inappropriate, like, whatever, not connotation. There's misconception that, like, you know, oh, well, they were going to jail or they got out of jail or something ridiculous.
Yeah,
because this is how people who are not educated in it think.
Definitely, no. I think that's a very real thing. When it's like most of our kids, like, so you remember the student that was walking out? Yeah. So you ask him why he got here, right? His IEP was not properly taken care of throughout the pandemic at his previous school, and his mental health deteriorated so bad because of the isolation that he couldn't keep up with his schoolwork, and that's why he ended up at a transfer school. So nothing to do with, like, yeah, and that's the case for most of these students, honestly.
Makes way more sense.
Yeah.
Okay. What made you want to be in social work in the first place?
Yes, my favorite question ever. So there's a quote that I read when I was younger that has resonated with me my entire life, which was to be the person you needed when you were younger. So as I had shared with you before, I am born and raised in Harlem. I am a first generation Dominican American. So mental health was not something that was openly discussed in my household. And if it was one of those, we'll pray on it. And or just like go to church, get over it. Like, you have nothing to be upset about. You're a child. Things of that nature, right? When we very much know that even though as adults, child problems may seem so small and minuscule, it's their entire world. And even for teenagers, like, a breakup is their entire world. They've never experienced heartbreak before, you know? So at a very young age, because of the fact that mental health was so stigmatized at home and stigmatized in my community, being that I grew up with Black and brown people, much like me, where they were like, what are you talking about? That person's just crazy. There's no name for that. Or, yeah, they're sad, whatever. Like, they're just upset because they couldn't get what they wanted or whatever it may be, right? Never really taking mental health seriously. I was like, I want to be the person that makes a difference. I want to shake the room. Let me shake the table a little bit. And it started small in my house, kind of questioning, like, well, why don't we talk about this? This is a very real thing. It's backed by scientific fact. And then I went to college and I studied psych, and I was like, I want to do this for the rest of my life because I'm making an impact. And that led me into social work. Working with adolescents primarily, I think that was the age group where I needed someone like me the most. So I was like, let me dabble for a bit. Let me see what kind of impact I can make by being the support system that I needed when I was younger. And so far, I've been working, aside from Mission with adolescents for maybe like 6-7 years. And I've loved every minute of it because I think that they're such an amazing age group and they're absolutely hilarious and they have so much to give. And I've been able to offer them the support that I know many of us needed when we were younger, and it seems to have paid off. So yeah, that's what inspires me.
Also, I'm realizing, like, normally I would like nod or say yes or something. When you're in the middle of a sentence, I can't, because then they can't take my voice out. So if I'm just sitting here doing this, it's
no worries at all. Yeah.
I just want you to know. Okay. Yeah. Now I'm just like paranoid. Oh yeah. So do you work just with the students? Do you ever work with their families when, like, if the student's having an issue or any capacity, or the families are having a problem?
So primarily for counseling, it's with students. When it comes to them needing some type of resource, that's when the family work comes in. So a big example of that is, like, let's say that we have a family that's going through like transitional housing. So maybe they're at a shelter currently and they need items for like hygiene, or they need clothing, or they need to get health insurance. I've helped a couple families get health insurance. We'll just sit down here and we'll fill out the applications together during open enrollment, and that supports them to get closer to having their needs met. That's where most of our involvement with family comes in. Also in psychoeducation. So that's a really big part of our work, is knowing our stuff, knowing what affects this population, so that we can then turnkey it in a way that parents and other family members can digest it and get a better understanding of why their child is going through whatever it is that they're going through. So many phone conversations, in-person conferences with parents about depression, about stress and anxiety, and like even their IEPs, because they might not have received a very in-depth conversation of like, all right, so my kid has like dyslexia written down on their sheet and they get extra time on a test. What does that mean? Why do they have that? So a lot of education in terms of like parent engagement comes from being a social worker. Yeah.
Great. I mean, like, I'm gonna ask it just for the bit, for the soundbite of it. I know you've told me, but given the school's like location and demographics and like everything to do about basically being in this location, is there anything specific that you notice that the students really struggle with?
Emotional processing. Yeah, and I think it goes back to the stigma that I was talking about earlier, right? So obviously that stigma existed when I was a child. It still exists, you know? Yes, now there are parents that, I love when I see a student tell me like, yeah, my mom took me to therapy. Yeah, my mom's totally cool with me like taking meds for my ADHD, or like getting a further diagnosis of some symptoms that you and I talked about. Fills me with so much joy, and I get like teary-eyed. I'm like, yes, you're doing the good work. Like, you're the parent that saw the issue and decided to change something. But there are a lot of families that aren't like that, right? So especially with boys, so since I mentioned before, I work with like boys groups primarily. My office is usually packed to the brim at this time with boys, like just talking all at once, and it's very overwhelming, but it's also very rewarding. Processing their emotions is very tough because they're told at such a young age to man up, to men don't cry, men don't express real feelings, like, oh, like we don't get attached to people that much, so please, like, don't even, why are you upset, you know, get over it. There's more important things in life than that. It's so hard to get them to feel comfortable to not open up, because they're very open. Adolescent boys are very, very open. It's sitting in their feelings and feeling their feelings that's hard, because they'll tell me anything and I'll be like, wait, let's take a pause. How do you feel about this? They're like, Jazz, what do you mean? Like, I don't really, and I'm like, no, sit with it for a minute. Like, how do you really feel about it? And then, like, not that I like to make them cry, but it's always like, yes, there's a breakthrough, you're showing emotion. And they'll be like, you know, my whole life, like, I've been told that it's not okay to feel this way. And I'm like, it's better to feel this way, because if not, you're gonna grow up, full disclosure, and just be miserable and bitter and not very good to the people that you love, because you can't open up. So I think emotional management, emotional processing are very big challenges with this population. And I won't even just leave it as a gendered thing. I think that our community tells us that our feelings are not things that we should experience, because there are always more important things. Like, yeah, you could be here crying, or you can get up and get a job because your mom needs help. Or, you know, you can go and pick up your siblings and take care of them. You don't have time for therapy because you need to be a babysitter, or you need to cook, or you need to make sure that your family is able to have more income coming in. Or, you know, the neighborhood that you live in, if you go to therapy at 6 and you come back at 7:30, it might not be as safe as when you come back straight after school. Very minor to like us when we're looking at it from a great scale, but major to people that are experiencing it, things that are happening that prevent them from actually processing their feelings, because there's always something else. You know, like, you have to take care of your physiological needs first before you get to your emotional ones, right? How can we support a population that is constantly thinking about their physiological needs?
Fuck yes. It's the same thing. Like, if you're starving, are you not depressed? No, but like, you could easily be depressed, but you just, like, you can't be because you have bigger issues.
Exactly. Yeah. So in social work, what I learned in social work school was, always take care of the needs first before we get into the feelings, right? Because a client can come to you and be like, I'm depressed. And it's like, all right, so like, talk me through your day. How easily is like food available to you? Are you employed? Do you have stable shelter? If they say yes to all of those things, and it's like, okay, cool, are you happy at your job? Are you That's when we get into the feelings of it. But if they're telling me no, I can only afford to like eat 1 meal a day, or I'm living in a shelter, or I just had to leave a really bad situation relationship wise, so I'm like crashing people's couches. Let's assess that first. Because there's no way we can get to the emotional part until your physiological needs are met. And that's a lot of what the work that we do here is, because we have students that are in shelters. We have students that can't buy shampoo. They can't buy tampons, pads, things like that. We cover that deficit as best as we can. We have those things available to them, because who else can go through their day even remotely happy without having those needs met?
You don't pay for those, do you?
Not ourselves. No.
Okay, great. Just checking. Some schools aren't having that issue. Can you share an instance where limited resources significantly hindered your ability to help a student or do your job?
I mean, I feel like we always wish we could do more for students. I do feel like I think the biggest limited resource that we experience is like how much we're able to give families to help with their needs. And I'm not saying that in a way where it's like we're gonna give them groceries for a year, because that's not sustainable, right? We're gonna, of course, we'll cover deficits when we can, and then we'll support them in obtaining either like food stamps or whatever it may be to help them through. But I feel like even in those instances where we're like buying a family groceries or providing them with clothes, the resources are so limited because we can only get so much. And then it's like, you help one family, you look back, there are 7 other families that need the exact same thing, and you're like, whoa, I could barely cover this one. So I think that those instances are the ones that have been the most challenging for me, where it's like I set a student up really well. Like, here are clothes and laundry detergent and everything that you need. And then like 2 weeks later, it's like, hey Jazz, you helped that kid out so well. Here's another one. And I'm just like, that was all I had. And that's heartbreaking. Now I have to pull, like figure out. And that's why I appreciate the community that we have at Harlem Renaissance, because sometimes like we ourselves pull out of our own lives to make these things work for students. There have been school aides and teachers that have been like, hey, I have clothes for, I heard this kid, our custodian, like our manager of like the custodians, there was a student here that was always like really in need. He was like, I have a coat, like, are you close with him? Like, I'm just gonna give you this coat, just give it to him. And I'm like, I love that, but I would love it if we could actually provide a lot more than that. Because yes, the coat is gonna keep him well for the, like great for the winter, but what if he needs shoes? Then who's gonna cover that? You know, if he can't cover it himself. So I think those are the most challenging ones. That, and like, I think also availability of resources when we have to refer out. So it's no secret that the wait lists for resources in New York City are insane. So when a student needs emergency services, we're like, where do we send this child? Like, they need help. And then oftentimes we're stuck, not stuck, but like we oftentimes take the brunt of the crisis when we don't have the capacity to really treat or diagnose or offer like housing to these students in need. So I feel like oftentimes the most that I can do is counsel, so I can't always meet the needs of my population. Yeah.
And I like also, it's like you obtaining, like me fundraising for you getting resources is like a thing that makes sense given the scope of like what Mission Society does, versus us having an inpatient facility doesn't make sense.
Yes.
Because that's not what we do.
Yes.
Yeah, that makes total sense to me.
Yeah, like it would be wiser to obtain funds to open up a food pantry or open up like a home goods pantry. Or even like in a nook somewhere, a wellness center that has all of these things, plus counselors that can help you not only with like one-on-one counseling or group counseling, but also like I need help filling out my food stamp application. I need help filling out a welfare application, and the welfare people are really mean. So can you help me? Like that would be my ideal world situation personally. But yeah, that would make a lot more sense than it's like, let's open up like a wing of a hospital to like put a bunch of sad kids in.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Also, like nobody wants to work with inpatient. That just
Period.
is so much work. Chris, no, inpatient, outpatient, like all of that we deal with so much. Just he and I. But anyway, can you describe any like what you really it is what you just said about like even just how you made like the janitor was able to give it to you to give to a kid, but can you describe any ways that you've improvised or found like creative alternatives to solve a problem because you didn't have the resources to do what you actually wanted to do?
Yes. So in a perfect world, I would not be in a shared office space with the people that I work with. Not because I don't love them dearly, because I do, but because obviously this place isn't soundproof and I want it to be as private as a space as possible. You make do with what you got, right? Mm-hmm. So we have sound machines. I bought wallpaper to like change the scheme of the office. I bought privacy film for the door. We have an oil diffuser. And a lot of this has come out of my own funds, with the exception of like the beanbag chairs. But like I've tried my hardest to make this more of a wellness room instead of an office, because like one, I don't want it to feel clinical because I want them to feel comfortable in the space. And two, if I didn't, then I wouldn't really get as many students wanting to come in, because they're like, oh, this place looks so different than every other place in the school building. And I'm like, yes, that was the goal. I'm so happy. So that's more what the realm of improvisation has come from. Also in like making materials. So like, you know those pretty posters that you see at their therapist's office where they have like a really cute personalized like feelings wheel, or their quotes, or like the kitten like falling off the tree. So those are cute, right? But they also cost money. Thank God for Canva, and also thank God for like me knowing how to do graphic design, but I've been able to create a lot of those tools myself. So like a lot of those therapeutic worksheets that you often get handed out if you're doing like CBT, or like even DBT, like I make those, like I personalize those for our population, whether I'm like finding one that I want to edit and pull questions out, or like I revamping one completely, I'll do that. I do put in requests for certain things like books, because I think that's huge. The creativity comes from how can I educate adolescents on mental health in ways that they can understand. And that goes into not only like putting it in terms they can understand, but let's put it in learning styles that they can understand. So visual representations, auditory representations that they can learn from are very important to me, because I know that every person cannot learn the same way. I'm certainly not someone that can like stare at someone lecture and quickly understand what they're saying. So I have to come up with my own ways, and my students are exactly the same way. So I've gotten very creative with how I educate students on certain things, whether that's like I printed out a pile of articles for you to like texting them like a TED Talk, like this goes to what we were talking about. And that builds more of a connection with them, because they're like, wow, she's thinking about me and how I said like, oh, I don't read. Like, she found another way for me to get it, because I've had that a lot. Like I've had a lot of my students like, Jazz, I don't read. And I'm like, let's find something else. Let's find a movie that'll see like if you can make sense of what it is that's going on. Like I remember in my previous work, I was trying to educate 14, 15-year-olds on different mental illnesses. And this was like way before I became a social worker, like right when I started my journey. And there is a movie, a claymation movie that I utilized for when I was teaching them about autism. And they were like baffled that I was able to pull out information from this movie. I'm like, this is what's called sensory overload, and like giving them like a whole thing. And I love doing that. Like I love using aids like that allow them to gain a better understanding of mental health.
Was like a claymation movie, was it specifically for autism, or just
no? Like it just so happens it was like a movie about two pen pals, and one of them was an adult man that had autism, and the other one was like a little girl that I think her parents were like going through a divorce, and she just wanted like a friend, and it showed both sides of their lives. So like what she went through on a day-to-day and what he went through on a day-to-day, and him like having comfort items, him going through sensory overload, him having a routine, like all of that was very like detailed in the film. And it was interesting. I chose that movie because I had a student in my class that had autism, and he always needed to wear his headphones because the other kids were really noisy. And they never understood why he would always be very secluded and had his headphones on. And so I pulled him aside like 2 weeks before, and I'm like, hey, so I want to talk about autism. Are you comfortable with that? He's like, yes, please. Like, teach them what I go through. So I asked him afterwards, I was like, do you feel like this movie is an accurate depiction of like some of the experiences that you go through? And he's like, yeah, I really felt him on that sensory overload part. And I'm like, yeah, me too. So it's like, you were right here. Like, but yeah, so using the use of different aids that they can understand is huge. It's a huge way to be like, you know, inventive with this.
What's the movie called? I'm just curious.
Oh, I'm gonna find it. I think it's like Max and something.
Oh, whatever, don't worry.
Yeah, I'll find it later.
Okay, this is just like my own sidebar kind of thing. How much do you think it costs for one student to get a full, I'm gonna call it a care package, like where like focused on if they need clothes, laundry detergent, like how much do you think that roughly?
I guess that would depend on like how long you want it to last, right? So like if we're talking like a month's worth of stuff, we're probably talking like 200 per student.
200 per student?
Yeah.
So I'm gonna do 200 per student per month. Okay.
Yeah, so we're talking like
So it's really more like for 200 a month is like all of your like, it's like toothpaste and all of that kind of jazz, not so
yeah,
much
because
like,
we also have to understand that it's not only going to be for them. They're going to bring it home and they're going to use it for their family, which was something that I guess was like difficult for me. Not difficult, but like I didn't connect the dots beforehand with some students where we'd give them little things or we'd buy them like detergent and stuff like that, and then a month later they'd be like, hey, like, do you have more toothpaste? And I'm like, I just gave you, your mom's using that too, and so are your siblings. Yes, we have more, but eventually we run out, you know.
Doing math. I'm doing a whole thing with twos for Giving Tuesday, asking for like, you know, pay for like one student in 2 years in the program and whatever. And I don't know how I'm gonna math that, but that can totally work. Okay. I basically have found so many different ways to ask you this question, and I feel like you already answered it, but I need to have it back up just in case. What resources do you think would be transformational for your students, or how can donor support help bridge an existing research gap and like help you serve your like mass of students more efficiently?
It would open up the world for us in terms of materials that we can get. So I don't mean that in terms of like cute little like, oh, I get an extra beanbag chair. No, I'm talking like I can actually get more bags for students filled with needs that they can take home and actually wash their clothes or brush their teeth or do anything like that. Buy groceries for a couple of weeks, you know, because that's a really big thing, being able to allocate proper food in order for them to come to school and actually be alert and awake and willing to learn, right? But also, one thing that I also wanted to touch on was a social worker's capacity to do the work relies heavily on the things that we learn, right? So I think that a donor's interest in the mental health sector of Mission would support us in gaining more trainings in order for us to better work with students. One that I can touch on that I've been dying to do is a gaming certification, where it's basically combining mental health and like gaming, so that you're able to incorporate things like D&D into a therapeutic experience, so that they can get something more than just like talk therapy. That's transformative for a client that's an adolescent, right? Because you're now making it more interesting for them. You're giving them a purpose to keep coming to sessions. Like, no, like I have to keep developing my character. And like I have to go through like the ogre's dungeon and figure out like why the ogre was angry or whatever it may be, right? That brings me to an activity that I did with my students in boys group, where it was kind of like I had them create their own superhero. So I gave them a blank slate, like superhero, and I'm like, here are colored pencils, go to town. give me a backstory, give me a name, give me the traumatic experience that led to them developing their powers, give me what their power is, like what's their day job, like all of that. And it was so awesome to see how in depth they went with their characters, but it was also very interesting to see that a lot of the students that took it very seriously, the trauma that led to them discovering their powers was the trauma that they themselves have gone through, and the powers that they had were exactly what they felt like they needed in order to change their life circumstances.
That's so cool. I mean, horrible, but like an incredible exercise. That's so interesting. It makes complete sense to me as far as...
I feel like I still have the copies there somewhere, but it was so cool. Like I had a student that went really, really in depth. Really in depth. I think his power was like... Was it to like cure people's illnesses? He had a grandmother that was like passing away from cancer, and that was really affecting him. So he was like, I just want to be able to like cure people or something. Yeah. Totally.
Also, I love all of I get so many ads for the gaming things, and I'm like also like so fucking curious because I would love that. I'm in the middle of getting like 1 billion certifications right now, so I can try to figure out how, because I'm a consultant and I'm totally, obviously I'm not, it's all over the fucking website draft. I'm like, I am not a doctor. I do nothing doctor related. Because I don't want anyone to get confused about like, I'm also not a life coach because that's nonsense. So like, whatever, because I was like, I really always kind of hated life coaches. I think there are really good ones out there, but the process I find to be completely like no regulations whatsoever. I could be a life coach for like $35 and like a 2-minute thing where I check a box that says I'm not a therapist. So I refuse. I'm just not going to do that. But like next week I'm taking 4 days off to to get project manager certified. Hopefully, we'll see. I mean, I'm doing it regardless, but I need to get tested and pass it after, so we'll see. But and I have like another one lined up for autistic communication of like, please send that to me. Yes. And I'm just trying to like build up certifications that I think are actually relevant to the job I'm trying to provide. And for you, I could totally, exactly what you just said as far as like trainings and certs to like as certain things come up, and also like even for the student that like was murdered, you would potentially be able to take a class, or you would have course around like on bereavement.
Yes, that's a huge one.
And like even on like traumatic loss and whatever. So that makes a ton of sense to me.
One thing that but I think your next question will help me answer what I wanted to say.
Do you believe there could be a broader community impact if students receive more comprehensive emotional and academic resources?
Yes. So that sort of connects to the training response that I had given in the question previously, right? So obviously we need training in order to broaden our scope of like knowledge, but also the resources that we could provide our students. Our students want to be trained as well, which is so dope. Like I've had a lot of students come to me like, Jess, how do I become like a mental health person? And I'm just like, well, it's a process, but like, what do you mean? They were like, I just want to know what to do. Like when my peer is like going through something, like if someone passes away, how do I comfort them? If my friend is depressed, like how do I know where to send them? How do I know how to like ask the right questions or like not trigger them? Like what really is a trigger? Things of that nature. I've had so many students that are like, I want to be someone's like peer advocate, peer support. And there are programs that do that, but like it's hard for us to sort of bring those in because it might not be allocated in the budget to make that happen. But like mental health first aid, there's an adolescent one available, and I would love if our students can make that happen. Like get that to be a thing for our kids, because there are so many that are just like, I just want to understand. Like I do really well in understanding my feelings, but in understanding others, I struggle, and I want to be supportive. I've had students that are just like, even for my younger siblings. Like how do I support them? How do I speak to them about bullying? How do I speak to them about the things that we see in our community? I don't have a training in that. I only know how to talk from my age group, So I think that there can definitely be a larger community impact, because a lot of the students that are getting something out of the counseling want to turnkey it to their communities. They want to bring it back to their friends and be like, hey, so what I learned in therapy today was this. And I see it constantly in the conversations that they have with each other. I might have had a session with a student, and then all of his friends are in my office, and one of them mentioned something vaguely close to what they said in therapy, and they're like, what you're doing right now is projecting or whatever it may be. And I get like so happy because I'm just like, you're learning things. It's more than just processing. You're taking things in and you want to share it. And I think that is like one of the greatest pieces of doing social work with adolescents, because and it like feeds my little soul when it comes to like being the person that I wanted to be, like that I needed when I was younger, because they're becoming the people that they needed. They are becoming their own agents of change by learning in the therapeutic process, and in turn they're destigmatizing mental health for themselves, for their friends, for their families, for someone random on the street that they might just decide that they want to speak to. And that's like, all right, I've done my job, I'm happy here. Like, that's it for me.
Yeah, oh, that's like so great. Okay, last thing. Is there anything else you want to add that you didn't have a chance to touch on? Oh, actually, wait, I'm sorry, I missed one. Can you share a success story where you were able to like adapt to a student or adopt your typical approach to really help a specific student in need? Without names.
No, of course.
So I just want to make sure. I was just like, sorry, it comes out of my mouth automatically.
Oh, there are a couple, but let's see. Which one do I want to say? I'll start general and then I'll like, so I have a lot of students that have a difficulty expressing themselves verbally, right? But they love to write. And I'm just like called up my program director, we need notebooks immediately. So I got a stack of notebooks and I set up kind of bullet journals per, like depending on the student. So if the student just does really well journaling, doing journal entries, cool. I had one student that it was always like something tumultuous was going down in her life. And I was able to get her in and build a really good rapport with her. And I was like, how do you feel about writing? Because sometimes, you know, it's difficult for you to focus when we're in session and I really want to know what it is that you're feeling, but I can't really keep track. And she's like, I can't do writing, Jazz. Like, I'm really bad at writing. I was like, how about coloring? And she's like, how am I going to tell you how I feel through coloring? And I'm like, oh, like this. And we started doing like weekly feelings entries, where basically it's like one day you might be coloring in planets, different colors depending on the key that we build, or it might just be a little bar or whatever. And then if you're so inclined, give me an entry. But if not, then I'll just ask you were blue yesterday, why were you blue? Blue means anxious, or blue means sad, or whatever it may be, or blue means happy. Whatever they would like it to be. I think that was very successful for her, because one, she was able to slow her mind down enough to sort of see her feelings like on paper, like, oh wow, like I really was feeling that, and here's why. And she actually did start writing journal entries because of it, which was great. But also it allowed us to get a better understanding of each other, because I sometimes get lost in like the process of trying to like really understand, like, does every word mean something? Sometimes it's just a tangent. and the little emotional barometer, like the coloring sheets that I would give her, allowed me to sort of hone in on what is actually affecting her. And that was so awesome. And we bonded over that. And things happened where her life did get a bit more like stabilized and regular, but like it allowed her to keep coming to therapy consistently, because she's like, I have things in my notebook that I need to share. And I'm like, yes, lay it on me. And it was great to see, like, and she graduated and I was like bawling my freaking eyes out. I was like, oh my god, she's like my freaking baby. But yeah, that's an example of how like I had to be a little bit like resourceful and sort of adapt to yeah.
That's really cool. That also makes so much sense too, because like just even like you are coloring, you slow your brain down, you get a little dopamine, and then it's kind of like, oh, I suddenly do have energy to like write or do a thing. I am like obsessed with that. It's a great method that I will just steal immediately.
I also had another student who wanted to go to college for screenwriting, and she wrote like stories a whole heck of a lot. She was very shy in person. Like you wouldn't even tell that she had worlds in her head. And that fascinated me because I love people that are so creative, but then they're very shy in person. So she came to me. She was like, so I heard this is where they do therapy. And I'm like, yeah. She was like, closes my door. I have things to talk about. And I'm like, yes, I love it. Let's talk. And she was like, I just have all these feelings and I'm going through all these things. And I'm like, okay, let's pre-K pause. I know you have a lot of words because you don't get your words out enough. And we're going to work on that. However, you told me you like to write stories. And she's like, yeah. I was like, how would you feel if instead of like journal entries, I tell you to write stories? And then we use those stories and we sort of like see where we're at emotionally and like see what you can process through story writing. And oh my God, did she write stories? She wrote stories, she wrote poems. Eventually she felt confident enough entering one of her poems in like a poetry competition that the school did. And everyone was so surprised. Like the DOE social worker came up to me, she's like, whatever work you're doing with her is really good. Because she came to me like, here, I'm submitting this. And this girl has been under the radar the entire school year. And I'm like, work done, like star, check, everything. And it was because I met the student where they were at. I met them based off their interest. And I think that that's the type of adaptability that we have to have as social workers that work within schools. It can't always be like laying out on the couch and like, tell me your feelings. Sometimes they need to use their creative outlets. Sometimes they often use their creative outlets to express their feelings. So why can't we utilize that and help them feel more comfortable in the space?
That's so fucking great. Okay. Is there anything else you would like to add? Anything you didn't get to touch on? Etc.
No.
No? Feels good?
Yeah, it feels great.
You did! And you did so well.
Thank you.
You seemed totally